Welcome to 12 Gauge Investigative.
In the shadows where the truth hides deep, echoes of the lost and the secrets they keep. Cold cases burn in the back of your mind. We dig through the dark, one clue at a time. This ain't fiction, this is blood, this is truth. 12 Gauge Investigative, justice uncaged. We ask the questions they're too scared to say, shining a light where the guilty pray. From killers to whispers, we won't look away.
All right. Happy Monday to everyone. My name is 12 Gauge. Welcome to my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. I hope everybody's having a good evening because I am doing wonderful. You know, I thought I'd get on here and I'd do a little reading tonight from this book that I've been reading for a while now, that is an awesome book by the author, Matt Murphy. If you don't know who Matt Murphy is, he was once a prosecuting attorney in Orange County, and he wrote this book called The Book of Murder. In this book, he outlines a lot of different things that he experienced along his journey. He talked about a lot of things that we talk about in the true crime community. So I thought that it would be an interesting book, as I've read this book, to just kind of go along and read the book and not have a night full of Idaho 4 for once. Because, you know, too much is just too much sometimes. And I've been reading this book for a while. It's time for me to complete another one. Because I've completed the other book that I was reading, so I thought I'd just get on this and continue reading it. As Rondi said, it's a good book. Of course it is. Awesome book. He gets very detailed in it, and he's very, very constructive with his wording and everything else that he uses. So, if you don't get your notifications, make sure that you unsub and then you resub to be able to be getting your notifications appropriately, because something's going on with YouTube. I don't understand what it is, but people are having problems with that area. So make sure that you get that notification set up so that you don't miss any of these, because not only do I talk about Idaho 4, I talk about other cases. As you've noticed in the shorts that I put out, I do a lot of different things on this channel that has to do with true crime. And I agree that my channel is pretty damn good. And not saying that to be boasting or egomaniac, but just to be confident of what I put out there. It's not for everybody. And that's fine. That's fine with me. You know, it doesn't have to be for everybody, you know. And I hope he does come on panel. It's been a while since I've reached out to his secretary, but hopefully maybe we'll get to that point. So let's continue on. Said the way to get past this was to pick up our samples carefully, hopefully finding locations where Sam or Xavier might have touch Kathy, but also where their trace DNA wouldn't be overwhelmed by her blood. I'm going to come off camera so that I can read without squinting and you guys looking at all the funny faces that I make. I think I'm going to go with this picture tonight. Hey, Sirius, thank you for being here. Here we go. But also where their trace DNA wouldn't be overwhelmed by her blood. If the two of them had put Kathy in the trunk of the car, for instance, with one carrying her legs and one carrying her upper torso, maybe we would get lucky. We asked the lab to swab the back of her knees, the cuff area of her jeans, her socks. Sure enough, we got a hit. But once again, it wasn't Sam. One more time, the DNA came back to Xavier. Still, this development was huge. Now I could argue Sam's alibi. Xavier certainly. Okay. Here we go. Xavier, who had no motive, held Kathy's legs as Sam had her upper body. With the arterial bleeding on the inside of the trunk lid, Xavier's fingerprint, and Xavier's DNA mixed in the blood smear on the fender, I could show that Kathy was still alive when Xavier helped move her into the trunk. That made him a principal to murder and not merely an accessory after the fact. Even against Lou, I thought I could get Sam through Xavier. So this is another area that in a lot of other cases that I believe that if people don't believe that certain individuals are applicable to the crime and that they might have just been an accessory after the fact, that is a charge, whether you believe it or not. Accessory to murder in this case, even if the individual didn't do it, you know, he was there and he assisted in this, so he might as well have killed her. You know what I'm saying? So that made him a principal to murder and not merely an accessory after the fact. Even against Lou, I thought I could get to Sam through Xavier. We had another piece to this case that I haven't yet mentioned, Juan Barroso. Juan was a friend. Both Sam and Xavier told police they had gone to Barroso's house that evening, which if they did, would almost certainly have been to clean up so they wouldn't go home all bloody. But Barroso backed their story, which in the view of detectives meant he should have known far more than he revealed. He told the same story for more than a decade. Juan was interesting to me because he was an outsider, not part of the Lopez family, and had no reason to take the fall for what happened. Juan was represented by Jake Brewer, another great lawyer, and even though he was worried about his own fate, Barroso would not cooperate with us and give up Sam Lopez. The entire Lopez family really circled the wagons around Sam and Xavier. They, maybe 20 people, would show up every court appearance at the beginning, watching, wearing matching t-shirts with cartoon characters whose hands were up against the wall as if they were getting frisked. "I've been framed," the shirt said. I felt it was a bush league and beyond disrespectful to Kathy's family. Whether or not they subjectively believed that Sam and Xavier were guilty, there was still a family there grieving the loss of a daughter and a sister. There was one member of the Lopez family, I think they called him Gorilla, and he stalked the hallway, listening for information he could feed back to the Lopez clan. Every time I would have a conversation there, he'd be within earshot. That could be useful, I thought. They say your best work as a trial lawyer always takes place outside the courtroom. In this case, that was the literal truth. Gorilla didn't pick up on the fact that I had noticed he was always there. I decided to use that to my advantage, suspecting that he might bring back anything he heard. Maybe, I thought, I could shake the tree a little bit and get Xavier to tell us what really happened. I asked Jake Brower if with his permission I could introduce myself to his client when we served him with a subpoena for the grand jury. Jake naturally didn't mind. Imagining that Gorilla was watching my every move, I had my investigator walk right up to Juan Barroso and hand him a grand jury subpoena. I then shook his hand and said, "I'm so glad we will finally be able to talk and have you share everything you know. I wish we could have met under different circumstances. Legally, I was referring to his obligation to tell us the truth in front of the grand jury. He likely had no idea what I was talking about, but it didn't matter. I didn't say it for him. Can't say that for sure if my gambit worked or not, but the next day, after Xavier had been in custody for almost a decade, I got a call from Xavier's attorney. Xavier finally agreed to talk. Remember, he was facing a first-degree murder charge and life in prison? I offered him a proffer agreement where he would be afforded a chance to cooperate, but we wouldn't be able to use his statements against him. He had been in custody for 8 years at this point and might be released if he just told us the truth. And he took the deal, or at least it seemed. Part of it. There was a strategy on his part too. He likely believed Barroso was going to tell the truth, and so Xavier decided to tell us the story that would lay out Sam, but not him. I can't imagine he was smart enough to think of this, but his story was so bad that had I called him to the stand, Lou would have destroyed him, categorizing him as a prosecution star witness, and Sam could have gone free. So it's always a game of cat and mouse, as you can see a little bit. Always a cat and mouse game. Xavier told us that Sam indeed killed Kathy and came to his house after he put her in the trunk. According to Xavier, when he pressed Sam for details, Sam told him he had left the knife in the trunk. Xavier told him he needed to get rid of the knife, so he had Sam drive him back to Kathy's car. He said he opened the trunk, thus the print, rummaged through the trunk to find the knife, accidentally cut himself with the blade, grabbed a rag to staunch the bleeding, noticed the blood on the fender, and without thinking tried to wipe it off, thus accidentally depositing his DNA on the outside of the car. His DNA on the back of her jeans must have been from him rummaging around looking for the knife. Hearing this was like watching a child explain how Santa came down the chimney and stole the missing cookie from the kitchen counter. Feigned intensity at all the wrong times, poor eye contact, fidgeting, and virtually every poker tell you that they could ever expect to see in a completely bullshit story. Just like a child, only this wasn't cute. My IQ was dropping with every minute he spoke. If I called him to the stand and he told this ridiculous story, then Lou would have shred him to pieces and argue that he had no credibility because he didn't. The jury wouldn't believe Xavier, and thus they wouldn't believe me, and my case wouldn't be done. Freedom for both murderers. I knew exactly what Lou would do because the man literally taught me how to do it. I knew the only way we could win the case was by never letting Xavier and his ridiculous story anywhere near the witness stand. I would go with my original plan and argue the hell out of the interview tapes, explaining how Sam could not possibly be innocent, given his behavior. Lean, mean, and clean, again, just like Lou had taught me. I ran with the evidence we had, presenting the case piece by piece, and building my argument around the idea that Kathy and Sam had this unstable relationship along with Xavier's DNA evidence at the scene. I then hit them with Sam's interview tape. Murdered girlfriend, but Sam was upset about the smudge on his hat. I believed I could win with that. It ended up not quite as easy as I thought. Looking back, the trial was an absolute war, and far and away the most difficult case I have ever presented. Lou Rosenbaum did things on cross-examination that I didn't even think possible. He went after Kathy's mother like a tiger, but managed to do so without offending a single juror. At the end of the first day on a case I had worked on for almost a decade, I realized that I needed to reassess each piece of evidence I planned to use because Lou was going to find every tiny vulnerability and exploit it to death. In the end, it all did come down to Sam's interview. I closed with perhaps the longest argument I have ever made. I picked the interview apart, word by word, line by line, and page by page. Each statement was like a new nail in Sam's coffin, and by the end, I felt like I had all 12 jurors on my side. The jury deliberated for 2 days and came back with a guilty verdict against Sam. First-degree murder. At the sentencing, in another mood that was pure Lou Rosenbaum, Sam made a statement to the court and to the Torres family. He admitted everything and said that he wouldn't appeal the verdict. I had never seen a defendant do that before, and it was legally pure genius. Sam would be getting a parole hearing someday, and Lou knew the parole board would look kindly on him taking responsibility for what he had done. He could finally get it off his chest, and the Torres family could finally receive an apology. I don't think it made them feel any better towards Sam, but it was quite a moment, legally brilliant, and a demonstration of pure professional class by Lou Rosenbaum. The truth, as Sam finally explained it, he and Xavier went to meet Kathy. Sam went to her car, and they began arguing. Xavier heard Kathy begin to scream, and he went to pull Sam away, assuming he had gotten physical. He didn't realize Sam had a knife and was stabbing her. Xavier accidentally cut his hand trying to pull Sam off of her. Kathy got away, but Sam chased after her and cut her face and her head. Xavier helped Sam put Kathy into the trunk, where Sam cut her wrist and her neck, sealing her fate, just like I had argued. Going back to the example of our two cowboys, the initial flurry of the knife wounds could have been a second-degree murder, but the throat slash and cuts on her wrist made it a pure, cold-blooded first-degree offense. They drove to the hospital lot and parked and left the car. The Torres family still calls me on every birthday. I'm so relieved that they finally got the answer they had been looking for, even if they were horrifying ones. Darren deserves so much of the credit for bringing Kathy's killers to justice, more than 2 decades after her brutal murder. The second case I want to explore here is a different kind of love gone bad. When we meet someone in a more traditional way, through mutual friends perhaps, in a workplace or at a wedding, that relationship begins with a point of commonality and some degree of mutually assured reputational destruction. If a person behaves badly, it will eventually get back to someone whose opinion matters. Even if we meet a stranger in a bar, at least we get to see them in 3D and how they interact in the world. This certainly doesn't always add up to decency, and partners have been doing each other wrong for millennia. But we live in a time when even those safeguards are largely gone. In fact, an entirely fresh lexicon has popped up to describe dating in the modern world. How's everybody doing tonight? Hope you guys are doing well. Once again, you know my name, 12 Gauge, and I'm reading from the Book of Murder by Matt Murphy, former prosecutor, Orange County. And, he's telling the stories as he remembers them, because he lived them, right? So can you imagine being in love with someone? I'm trying to get the lighting right. Oh, that's too dark. Can you imagine being in love with someone and they betraying you to the point where they initially kill you? If you've ever gone through a toxic relationship, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not pretty, and it's never amicable on both parts. Thank you so much, Sirius. Thank you for that. So it says terms like catfishing, breadcrumbing, and ghosting didn't even exist a few years ago, and now we hear them all the time. For the reader who has been married for a while, you may not completely understand. For the reader who is single, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The wild, unhinged, broken glass saloon brawl that is online dating. At first glance, it seems like a playground of abundance, but the sheer number of people out there doesn't necessarily correlate with quality. It takes about 15 minutes to put together an awesome looking profile, especially with the use of old photos, and nobody leads with their particular brand of neurosis. Online dating is an arena where even normally nice people can be tempted to behave terribly. He shows up late, there are a dozen men lined up right behind him, ready to show up on time. She lets slip a few too many details about her ex over dinner. There are 6 new messages in your inbox from women who won't. Yeah, online dating is awful. I don't know if you've ever done it, but if you've ever done some online dating, it is a terrible, terrible place to be. There are a lot of individuals that um, do not represent who they state they are. They really don't. They they do say the right things, but most of them aren't on there for the right reason. They're usually on there to get their bills paid, have just random sexual encounters or anything like that, which there's nothing wrong with that if you're at that point in your life for that. But, you know, some of them are not on there for the right reasons. Or like he just said about the neurosis, yeah. If you perceive something on a date that isn't exactly what you're looking for, there's no need to waste time talking about it. You can just ghost, block, delete, and repeat. With complete strangers, nobody owes anyone anything, and the resulting behavior sadly shows. There are simply no rules, and I challenge anyone who has online dated for more than a week to say they have treated everyone with the same dignity and respect they would have done if they met, say, at a wedding or mutual friends. This is so true. You know, you'd say things to people that you wouldn't do. You say things online that you wouldn't do to people in real life. You really wouldn't. There's virtually no social consequence to mercenary behavior. Few can cast stones. I'm talking about reasonably healthy people. Don't get me wrong, there are certainly wonderful people online, and countless happy relationships begin every single day. For the vast majority of these interactions, the greatest risk are really just bruised egos, broken hearts, and wasted time. But for the predators of the world, this era has enabled an unadulterated gold rush. I prosecuted several horrific murder cases where my victim met her killer online. Loneliness and a fundamental human need for interpersonal connection coaxes some people into letting their guard down in ways that perhaps they shouldn't. We have all been there before in one way or another, but never within the context of current format of dating apps and the promises of quick connection, quick sex, and quick love. I could sadly fill this book with stories of romantic disaster, but there is one case I want to share where the ending was somewhat less tragic. In fact, it was downright happy. Dirty John, the podcast famous case that I mentioned all the way back in chapter 1. It's a true story of an online dating boogeyman, John Meehan. Working with the investigators who unraveled his actions, I was reminded of some of the red flags I've seen throughout my career, and they're not necessarily the ones we think of right away. When dealing with strangers, especially those we meet online, predators often show warning signs that you can spot if you're looking, but that the well-meaning, naive, and forgiving among us might miss. Meehan, a poster boy for what to avoid, spent his life lying, seducing, and terrorizing women, going from one to the next, meeting almost all his victims online. Of course, he was bad long before the online dating sites even opened for business. I'm gonna take a break right quick. You guys chat. My parents are trying to call me about their dog. So let me call them back right quick. Don't run off. I'll be right back. Okay, like cat and mouse. They call you, you call them. They don't answer, and here we go. So here we go. Thank you so much for waiting on me. It says, first there was Tanya Bales, a nurse and anesthesiologist and wonderful woman who made the mistake of marrying Meehan in 1990. After 10 years and two daughters, Tanya discovered that her husband had been living a double life. Not only had he been cheating on her, but he had been hiding an arrest for cocaine trafficking from her before they got married. His real birthday made him 6 years older than what he claimed. He had just been he had just impregnated another woman, and Tanya discovered what he'd been stealing pain medication from the patients he was supposed to care for at the hospital where he worked as a nurse. Bales finally reached out to John's mother, a woman he had forbidden her to speak with, only to learn he'd been a pathological liar his entire life. After John and Tanya's divorce in 2002, Meehan was investigated and charged for the theft of pain medication. After pleading guilty, he ran from the police, kicking one officer in the face before falling into an elevator shaft and knocking himself unconscious. He served 17 months in prison and was released, a convicted felon in 2004. He made his way from Michigan to California, where he discovered the nascent world of online dating. John Meehan went to work. His formula was pretty simple. Find lonely older women with money, charm them, bed them, promise them the moon, and then take them for everything he could get his hands on. When they figured out what was happening, often too late, he would then threaten them, extort them, and in one instance in early 2014, stalk them. He had been arrested a year earlier for extorting one woman out of thousands of dollars which might very well have turned into a 40 million payday had a friend of the woman not looked him up online and found enough information to cause the heartbroken and terrified target to backtrack. This is a guy who would show up in a surgical scrub for dates. As a former nurse, he also knew how to talk the talk. Meehan extorted a car from another woman and an RV from a third. He spent a few months in the Orange County Jail for stalking charge and was released on October 8, 2014. Sounds like a winner, doesn't it? Before he could even get his jail-issued classification bracelet off his wrist, he was already back online looking for his next date, which is when he met Deborah Newell. Deborah was a successful, wealthy interior designer who had already been married 4 times. Meehan was charming and handsome, and just like with the other women, he showered her with time and attention. He'd tell me how beautiful I was, she told People magazine, asked me about my day and rubbed my back. I was infatuated with him. He claimed to be a doctor who had volunteered for Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. In reality, he had only been out of custody a few days before the first date. But Deborah had no clue about his history and, like the others, was completely smitten. It can be easy for us to look back with the clarity of hindsight and criticize the decisions of a woman like Deborah. How could she not realize that the man in dirty scrubs was telling her things that made no sense? The best answer to really understand this can be seen in a wonderful miniseries starring Connie Britton and Eric Bana that portrays the evolution of their early relationship. Having lived that case, I can happily say that both actors were positively brilliant, and it really is worth the watch. Eric Bana, in particular, nailed it. The charm, the cadence, the manipulation. It is masterclass in acting. Deborah's daughters, on the other hand, weren't fooled for a minute. Her oldest daughter, Jacqueline, hated John and couldn't believe her mom appeared to be choosing this loser over her and her sister, Tara. This was made worse when less than 3 months after they started dating, John and Deborah returned from a trip to Vegas married. Unknown to Deborah, but certainly unsurprisingly when later learned by her daughters, John Meehan had been the subject of no fewer than 6 restraining order applications, filed by 6 different women. Pretty soon, family members began doing some of the due diligence that Deborah never thought necessary. She began learning about Meehan's past and finally started to come to her senses. Deborah sought to annul their marriage. Meehan, convincing as ever, somehow persuaded her into reconciling, and they moved into a luxury apartment together in Irvine. As time went on, Meehan's behavior became more and more controlling. He forbade Deborah from speaking to her daughters. When he caught her talking to Jacqueline, Meehan made a comment about throwing her into the ocean. Evidently, Deborah Newell had enough. She told him so, and Meehan's threats and rage then turned on her. Likely so, many women before Deborah applied for a restraining order. Incredibly, it was denied. She went into hiding. Meehan ended up filing for divorce and demanding half of Deborah's money. A lawsuit perhaps not satisfying enough, he then decided to steal her late model Jaguar and light it on fire. The stalking began in earnest. On August 20th, 2016, Deborah's daughter Tara was returning home after walking her Australian Shepherd Cash. Tara couldn't stand Meehan and was relieved her mother had finally seen the light. Still, she had always been very polite to him compared to her sister, Tara. With blonde hair, pleasant Southern California beach vibe, was mellow, nice, loved by her family, and really loved her dog. As Tara made her way through the parking lot of her Newport Beach apartment complex, she was suddenly attacked from behind by a large man with a knife. It was Dirty John Meehan, her putative stepfather, and he grabbed her like a grizzly bear. He tried to force her into a nearby car, and the fight was on. Tara, having now been stabbed once, was a foot shorter and more than 100 pounds lighter than the athletic Meehan. Despite her slight stature and beat chick vibe, Tara is a genuine badass. She also had Cash, the hero dog, who began biting the living hell out of Tara's attacker. The fight had gone to the ground at this point, and momentarily distracted by Cash, Meehan took his eyes off Tara. Big mistake. She managed to kick the knife out of his hand. An avid fan of The Walking Dead, Tara knew exactly how to dispatch a monster. She immediately picked up the knife and stabbed him first in the shoulder, then the face, and then directly in his left eye. The knife blade penetrating deeply into Meehan's twisted, maniacal, thieving brain. With the 13 stab wounds in all, the fight was over. Tara had been stabbed, Meehan lay dying, and Cash was fine. "I'm sorry, Mom," Tara said when she called Deborah, "but I think I killed your husband." There's a photo of Tara in the hospital that was submitted to me with the rest of the investigation. It showed her in a bed, all hooked up to various machines. On her lap, staring right at the police photographer, was that dog. A little nervous, perhaps, maybe even a little suspicious, but more than ready to bite the next fool who tried to hurt his mom. It was an awesome image that I will never forget. John Meehan died of his wounds 4 days after the attack, having never regained consciousness. When police got into the car he was trying to drag Tara into, they found a backpack containing a gun, ammunition, tape, zip ties, and cyanide capsules. Not exactly tough to figure out what his plans were for Tara. My friend investigator Julia Bowman later described it as a kidnap and kill kit. I certainly did not disagree. Most of the time, your job as a prosecutor is to meticulously assemble a case for criminal prosecution. Sometimes it's equally important to methodically clear someone from any and all criminal culpability. The more I learned about this case, the more fascinated I became. Not only had Tara done absolutely nothing wrong, but she had in fact saved her mother, herself, and likely many others from whatever John Meehan was about to do next. Tara was another genuine hero I was privileged to meet during my time in homicide. Too good a story not to share after Tara had been completely cleared. I called a buddy of mine named Chris Goffard, who worked for the Los Angeles Times. A fantastic reporter, I thought he might like to share Tara's story with the readers of the Times. Instead, he shared it with the world. He put together the astounding Dirty John podcast and a series of articles that are really worth checking out. He dove into Meehan's background and revealed things that even I didn't know. During an associated event put together by the Times, I reunited with Tara and finally got to meet Cash. Cash and I hit it off immediately, and Tara and I have become friends. She is every bit as awesome as she sounds. So what is the takeaway from this, aside from never underestimating California Beach Kid and her dog? The first is not to fall victim to the fallacy that we could do a better job at intuitively spotting psychos than Deborah Newell did. When we're lonely, we can be very sympathetic target to the emotionally unhinged or predatory. Meehan is an extreme example of what can go wrong when meeting and dating strangers online. There are a lot of people out there who may fall far short of attempting to kill a family member, but they can still march you right down the path to relationship misery. My advice, having prosecuted more online generated nightmare domestic violence cases than I can count, would be to cut, run, and return to the well if you encounter any of Dirty John's dirty behavioral traits. This list is orientated toward women meeting men, but it can really apply to anyone. First, any man who asks for money under any circumstances needs to be blocked and deleted immediately. I don't care if it happens on your first date or your 15th. You should also report him to whatever site you are using. That is so true. So true. Second, any man who gets physically aggressive with you in any way needs to go. It is beyond unacceptable. Those are the guys who murder their wives. Third, any sort of criminal conviction other than one DUI that he take complete responsibility for means your man is likely a complete loser who makes terrible decisions. There are exceptions to this, of course, but very few. Fourth, any man who checks your cell phone is either massively insecure, controlling, or both. Fifth, any man who seems sketchy about where he is living are either broke, living with his parents, or married. Six, anyone who seems jealous of the time you spend with your own family members will eventually alienate you from anyone who may garner your attention instead of him. Seventh, and this will be controversial among some men, but any guy who has a major problem with the men you work with, or even ex-boyfriends or ex-husbands with whom you have a positive relationship, is jealous and insecure. They will package their complaint as having a healthy boundary, but in my view, there's nothing healthy about it. Trust is healthy. Telling an adult woman who she can speak to is controlling and often lead to far greater instances of abuse. Eighth, if a man doesn't have a job, it is only a matter of time before he will be living off your paycheck. Ninth, any man who lies about his job will be comfortable lying about everything else. 10th, any guy who tried to rationalize a previous restraining order or any prior act of domestic violence is someone you do not want to be in your life. Finally, 11, do your due diligence. Get his Instagram, tell your friends about him, and Google the guy. If Deborah Newell had simply Googled John Meehan, her computer probably would have exploded. When thinking about Dirty John, I can't help but go back to Rodney Alcala and how the dating game contestant chose him by his words before she actually spent any time with the three-dimensional version of who he was. She was immediately too creeped out to even go on their date. Monsters can mask their true nature, especially in settings where you get limited exposure to the first selves. The online world can be a predator's playground because these psychopaths have been provided a platform where it's very easy to lie. Once emotions come into play and you've fallen for the predator, defenses are down, friends and family are alienated, and you can be very much alone when you finally realize who and what you're actually dealing with. Chapter 8. Nuristan Province. There's a body in my son's apartment. A dead body. Jesus, she's cold. Is it someone that you know, sir? No, I have no idea who she is. I don't know what's going on. Does your son know who she is? He's not here. Jesus, lady. Do you know where your son is? No, I don't. I told you. Just keep breathing for me, sir, okay? Where in the apartment is she? She's in the bedroom. She looks like there's been some sexual activity. She's dead. There's blood from her head. I touched her on the cheek. She's cold. There was blood from her head? Yeah, honey, I don't know what to tell you. Steve Herr was used to worrying about his son Sam, 26 years old, who had been home a short time since being honorably discharged from the Army in 2009. Sam had served in one of the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan, near the northwestern Pakistani border. For a time, the U.S. military strategy in Afghanistan had been one of the interdiction, diverting, disrupting, and trying to destroy the enemy along the rugged border. Army intelligence had determined that this Taliban had been receiving most of its supplies as well as many of its fighting young men from the Madaras, the Islamic religious schools of this lawless and largely autonomous tribal area across the border in Pakistan. One of the most dangerous and inaccessible places in the world. The idea was to build a series of operating bases to support the small combat outposts that could block the critical smuggling routes along this porous border, some of which probably dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. In fact, shortly after this rotation home, Sam's tiny base, Camp Keating, was famously overrun by the Taliban, which was repulsed in one of the most famous battles of the entire war. The strategy was working, which meant the Taliban reacted as one might expect. They attacked these bases constantly, In one stretch, Sam saw combat 83 days in a row. It was far from easy. These outposts, isolated as they were, all ran on electric generators to call in support in the form of artillery or airstrikes. When the bases were under attack, electricity was needed. No generator meant no communication, and no communication meant no protection. But for safety, the fuel used to run these generators needed to be stored in a different location on the base than the troops or the generators themselves. Under near constant fire, the last thing they needed was for some lucky shot or a careless smoker to ignite the fuel and blow everyone up. The Taliban knew all of this, so they would engage the base with attacks, prolonged enough that the generators would surely run out of fuel and the support would stop, which would leave the soldiers as sitting ducks. When the fuel got low, someone would have to run through the open space, under enemy fire, and bring back jerry cans, steel containers first used widely in World War II, of fuel back to the generators. At Camp Keating, in the Nuristan province of Afghanistan, that poor brave bastard was Samuel Herr. Sam had grown up in a small town just north of San Fernando Valley, famous for Frank Zappa's iconic song Valley Girl, Nicolas Cage's first starring role in a movie of the same name, The Karate Kid. Sam ran into trouble as a teenager with a small legal scrape when he was in high school. He spent a year in jail awaiting trial to serious charges, but a jury ultimately found him not guilty and he was released. Much like my old boss, Rick King, Sam did not like the direction of his life at that point, so he joined the military, where he learned how to repair those diesel generators he would end up risking his life to refuel. Although several members of Sam's platoon were killed and many more wounded, Sam returned home after 3 years of service without a physical scratch. He had spent a lot of his time contemplating his future. He was ambitious, having persuaded additional combat training in jump school to become a paratrooper. He wanted to return to the Army as an officer. This is a lot easier with higher education, so taking advantage of the GI Bill, Sam enrolled at Orange Coast College. He got an apartment in a sprawling complex across the street from the school called the Camden Martineck Apartments. It was sort of a Melrose Place with frequent parties and multiple swimming pools and was populated largely by other students. Sam made friends and was doing well in school, and his life seemed to be going very well. His parents, Steve and Raquel, were happy Sam was home, and most importantly, safe. All of which is why Sam was not expecting to arrive at Steve was not expecting to arrive at Sam's apartment on the evening of May 22nd, 2010, to find a dead body in Sam's bedroom and no sign of his son. Sam was supposed to visit his parents that weekend and hadn't shown up. Calls to his cell phone were going unanswered, so on Saturday night, Steve drove to Sam's apartment. Sam had given Steve a key, and they used it to open the door. And once he got a glimpse of the bedroom, Steve immediately called for help. In a typical year, there are always a few homicides in Costa Mesa, and many look very similar to this, at least at first. The scene initially appeared to be a domestic violence murder. The victim, whose purse and identification were there in the apartment, was Julie Kabushi, 23 years old, also a student at Orange Coast. She was found bent over the bed, face down, her jeans around her knees, her head wearing a tiara, was in a pool of blood on the comforter, and scrawled on the back of her shirt were the words, "Are yours, fuck you." There was an open pregnancy test and a strange pencil sketch of a woman in the middle of a fire labeled, "I'm done," oddly left face up in the apartment. Julie's ringtone, Taylor Swift, "Today Was a Fairy Tale," sounded off constantly from her purse, creating a macabre soundtrack to the whole scene. And Sam was missing, presumed to be on the run. I was more than 2 hours away that night at a birthday dinner for a woman I was dating at the time. She wanted to visit her super lovely grandparents who lived in La Quinta, a small desert community near Palm Springs, California. We had just ordered when my phone rang. The relationship wasn't new. We had been seeing each other for over 6 months at that point, so the fact that my work could call me at any time wasn't exactly a surprise. So the and she was also a deputy district attorney for Los Angeles County, though most critically, not in homicide. There really was a difference even between units in the office. When we're called in virtually any other assignment, it could be absolutely wait until the morning. But when I got a call, it meant a killer was probably on the loose and my cops needed me. Even if I had the choice to tell them I would deal with it later, I would never have done that. If I stuck around to finish the night dinner, I would have been doing so at the same time. Some poor family was enduring the worst thing they could ever experience. Besides, the detective who called me were more than professional colleagues. They'd become my friends. And we've been through a couple dozen murder cases together by this point in our lives in homicide. All right. So I think I'm gonna call tonight. Um, as you can see, Matt has some interesting cases, and I hope that you enjoy the reading that I do. They're always educational, to say the least, no matter what people realize or don't. You learn a lot from reading other people's experiences, even if it's just something simple. We can always learn from each other, and nobody is 100% perfect, no matter what they might think. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know there wasn't a lot of people in here, but hey, sometimes it's not everybody's cup of tea to listen to me read. And I understand that. I hope you guys enjoy it. Y'all have a wonderful night. Maestro, cue that music.